All right. So today we're going to be looking at React router hooks. Um, I do apologize for the paucity of the outline here, but we're going to be building on what we learned with React router from yesterday. And we'll do a little warm up and review as well. Whoop. But we're going to be building a simple Game of Thrones characters app along the way. And that's how we're trying to kind of build this out. So just like you all have started working with the Rick and Morty API, we're going to be doing similar things with the Game of Thrones API and building that out today. Um, excuse me. So with React Router hooks, we're going to see some pretty powerful tools it has. useParams, useNavigate, and useOutletContext. And can everyone read? Are these font sizes good for everyone? Okay, awesome. So useParams is going to let us grab parameters from a URL, and I'll talk about that in a minute. useNavigate is going to let us, rather than having to wait for the user to click on a link to go somewhere, if I decide based on something in the code that I want to navigate to a certain front end page in my app, I'll be able to use navigate for that. And useOutletContext is going to be a little more complex, but we're going to see how it's going to allow us to pass data between an outlet and its children. Where if yesterday, we talked about how we now have a router provider that essentially wraps app.jsx. And in our router, we now have logic. And then the special outlet component in app renders children. We're going to see how we can pass what's called context into the outlet that lets us then pass data into all of its children. Such as, say, user profile. So this is going to be an alternative to props for passing data between components. Because the challenge with a prop is because the outlet does the job of rendering a child component. So, I might have the about page, I might have the home page, I might have the page to look at a single Game of Thrones character, depending on what's up here in the URL bar. Right? If I could have, this would be the home page, this would be the about page, this would be, we'll just call this character, a character page. So because the outlet dynamically renders different components, it's a little weird to pass props in, right? So React Context is a solution to this problem where normally if I knew that this component would always be here, I could pass a prop in, no problem. But because we're using this special outlet component, we can't do that. So that's a little more advanced, and we'll get to that in part two. And what we're going to do is I'll start by just building up a skeleton React Router app, maybe with a little help from you guys, and we'll do a little review of yesterday. But then we will get into using this Game of Thrones API, and we're going to make a list of characters very similar to what we see here. And we'll make a separate maybe we'll just call it character detail page, very similar to what we see here. And along the way, we might also, if we have time, do some like favorite characters and stuff like that. And you can see that this is pretty similar to the other APIs we've used. It follows the conventions of a RESTful API. This first part of the URL is the API version, so that when a V3 of the API comes out, they can maintain V2, and if there's changes, it doesn't break people using the V2 API, and they can migrate at their convenience. And then the name of the resource that we want our HTTP GET request to get, which in this case is all the different characters. Or here, the resource is from all of these characters, get an individual character. And let's see if we can try this out. There we go. So maybe let's see who has ID of 3. And ID of 3 is Arya Stark. And again, here we can see this REST or representation of state transfer. I think API format followed, where the HTTP verb indicates the action that we want to perform against the server, and probably against the database that the server has. We want to get data. We want to read data. We want the resource to be from the characters, and in this case, it's an individual character. So I just want to pause and see if folks have questions or anything that you're curious about before we start our sort of warm-up review and writing of code. And Nick, yes, sir.
Would you go back to TL draw?
Yeah.
So the idea is, because it would be a pain based on the way we're using outlet to generate a bunch of different pages to pass props back and forth, we're going to use hooks, like useParams from the router to pass data back and forth in an easier way. Is that right?
That is part of it. Correct.
Okay.
There's going to be, in fact, a couple things going on. We'll start off with URL params. And by a URL parameter, I mean just any part of the URL. If we were using character names, then this would be the part of the URL, the parameter of it that I care about. In this case, it's IDs. Because what I really want, and Carlos, this is a great diagram. I wish I had built it out in TailDraw, actually, so I could expand on it a bit. But what we're going to see in just a little bit, we're going to do a little warm up first. But basically, over here in our app component, we're going to use this useParams hook. And we can use that hook anywhere we want. And that's how we can grab this. And then once I have this, I can put this in React component state or whatever I want. And so in any component I want, I could use this useParams hook to grab something from the URL, which is super useful because now this URL can almost hold data. And also, if I want to look at Arya Stark's info, and let's just grab this URL here as the example. Like, let's pretend this wasn't just a GET request, that this was the URL for our app. Well, now if I want to share like Arya Stark's details with you, I can put this in an email or something like that, right? Or link to it from another page, or put it in a text message. And the fact that my React app can grab data from this URL parameter and use that to dynamically change the UI is really powerful. Outlet context that I mentioned here, we'll get into in part 2, and I think it'll be easier to just tackle that one when we get there. Because that one's a little trickier, but also like once we have some code, it'll be a lot easier to sort of see the problem that it solves. Yeah, great question, man. Oh, Carlos, thank you. I love it. let's see. I don't know if I can look at that. Go TL draw. I can copy and paste between things. So we're probably going to use this more because I think this is pretty cool. So let's do a quick sort of transferal here. And we'll grab all of that and I'll make it big. And we'll make it, there we go. So that ought to do the job. Carlos, thank you so much, man. Yeah, this is a great diagram. All right, let's do a little building and review along the way. And just to help sort of remind us of stuff, I'll have this up here as I do this. So job one is I've got my app, but it doesn't do much. I haven't installed React Router. I haven't done much. So let's go ahead and install React Router DOM from yesterday. Let's install Bootstrap too, because we'll probably use it in a little bit. I'll run npm audit fix force just to fix whatever the moderate vulnerabilities are in the installed packages. And I believe I already installed Axios, but we'll install it again just to be safe. I've got my dev server running in another terminal here, so we should be good to go. Let's just go ahead and do some setup along the way. Let's import the Bootstrap CSS that we'll need. So bootstrap slash dist slash CSS slash bootstrap min CSS. I believe that's what we want. And I'll do a quick double check here by looking inside known modules to look inside the actual bootstrap package, dist CSS. Yep, bootstrap.min.css. Perfect. So that should do it. I'll remove app here. I'll remove app here. Can someone remind me maybe what are our React router sort of setup steps? Or I like to call it sort of like a skeleton site. You know, there's no content, but React router is installed and set up, and we have a page or two. So I've installed it, right? Um, what do I have to do next?
Router.jsx file.
Yup. And what do I probably want to do in my router.jsx file?
Well, you want to import this stuff. You want to import, probably you want to import the app.
Yep, totally. And I didn't mean that to be a trick question. I apologize. That was a little too vague. I was just thinking we'll want to create a couple pages, but we've got a couple intermediate things that we need to do here. And like you were implying, to do that, we're going to need to make some, create a few empty page components.
Yep.
Import.
Yeah. Well, you're setting conditions for it. Yeah, it makes sense. I was more like, we'll start creating paths toward it.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Create router objects, paths. There's like one other setup step here that's pretty key that we have to do for React Router to work, like maybe one or two.
Well, the outlet has to be put into the app, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So you gotta import the outlet in there as well, and then the main JSX. I know there was an import that you did there as well.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. We have to use the router provider in, I'll just say main.jsx instead of app, right? And let's say mount on the root DOM element. Right over here, instead of app, we now have our router provider. Awesome. And I like kind of laying out, this is to me a pretty good example of pseudocode. And I think it's really useful, especially as projects get bigger, to get in this habit, because there can be a lot of steps, but once I have a list, I can kind of burn through it. And this often is the hard part, right? Just remembering all these steps. And so let's go ahead and let's write a bit of code. I'm actually going to do a little bit of split so I can have my to-do list up here with me. I think I'm going to put this off to the side for now. So let's start by, I have to create router.jsx. So let's just do touch source router.jsx. And now we can start building out our router. And I am going to pull up some guide code to help me remember all of the different imports I need to make in here, because I don't have all that by memory. And we're going to import the create browser router that we use. We're going to need to use the app components. And we're going to need to eventually import our pages. And we need to now construct the router object using the create browser router function that, just like you were saying, it takes an array. In there, we pass one big routing object and set the path for our base URL. And we tell it what element or what component to use. I guess component is the new way, so I might as well do components. They do the same thing. Or I'll stick with element just so we have consistency. And then we're going to need some children, right? And then these are where we put like individual page routes. But I haven't created any pages yet, so let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's make a directory named pages. Let's make a directory named components as well, because we might do that later. And let's make an about page. Let's make a home page. And we talked about like characters, so it's not going to do anything yet, but let's make a character page. And so we've got, these are done. Let's make a couple empty pages here. Let's go to our home page. Let's leave the div. Let's put the home page in an H2. And I'm just going to copy this. And let's go to the about page. And we'll change this to about. And let's go to our character page. And we'll change this to character. And now that I've got a couple empty page components, I can hop back to my router, right? Next item checked off the list, and we can add in some of our routes here. Can someone remind me what index true does?
Basically sets that as your starting point. So whenever the outlet loads, that's what's going to be loading.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that here in the URL, we'll see it in just a minute when we add the outlet, but I don't need to put /home or about or whatever for the base route for the index. It loads the homepage element. However, our other pages do indeed need paths. And I think I ran into this yesterday. Am I correct in thinking that I don't want this slash up front?
I don't think you need it.
Yeah.
I think it's smart enough to auto-generate that or something.
Yep, agreed, agreed. And we'll do the character page. We'll probably want a page to show all the characters, so I'll make that in a moment as well, as long as we're doing this.
We'll also want to put an export in here for the router.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I forgot about that. We'll export the router. Let's make a few other pages as long as we're making pages. Let's make a page for all the characters, and I'm naming it all characters so I don't have like character and characters and make a typo. And hopefully we'll have time to do a favorite characters page. So let's make that as well. And as you guys can see with the Vim keyboard shortcuts, I do a lot of copying and pasting. But you know, Emmet also works really well. Though frankly, having some sort of boilerplate code for this sort of stuff to copy and paste, I think is sort of a win. And we'll close out some of all these pages so it's just not super cluttered. We'll probably come back to some of it later, and we'll add paths for these as well. So to follow like RESTful API convention, the all characters page is just characters plural. And then we have our favorites. I'm not going to worry about the air page or anything like that right now, just in the interest of time. So now that that's done, if I just kind of run down my list, well, actually, I think I want to mount router provider first before using the outlet so I can check, make sure that this is working. So over here, let's import router provider, and we'll render it like so.
Do we need router provider space lowercase router equals curly brackets router?
We absolutely do. I was looking at the air and thinking there's totally something I forgot here. That is a great call. We need to import the router that we created, which is a default export, so I can just import router from router. And we need to pass that array of objects, our router object in here as a prop, so that the router provider has our routes. And I think this is the right prop name. Does this look right to everyone?
Mhm.
Awesome. So now we've got this set up. I see my app.jsx rendering. If I go to component dev tools, I see the router provider stuff. So I know that we've done pretty good. Now we just have the last step, and we don't need to have sort of our checklist with us, which is to use the outlet. So first of all, let's make this an H1. And let's add in the outlet component. And now through the power of React Router DOM, we have an outlet. And I'm going to make a very simple navbar. I'm not going to use the bootstrap navbar right now, just in the interests of time. I'm just going to do let's make it really simple. Let's have it be just like div, and we'll have it have a span, and inside here we'll have a link, and the link will go to about, and here I believe we do need the slash up front. Does that sound right to folks?
Yes.
Yeah. And can you remind me why?
No.
Because you have to change link to well the syntax to two as opposed to href because of the bootstrap link, right? Something like something for that.
I don't remember the exact reason why it works that way, but if you just do home without the slash, it just kind of appends it to the URL. If you do the slash, it'll kind of start off, your starting point will be the base URL, and it'll just append home to it instead of, if you click home and then you click about, it'll be slash home slash about.
Yeah.
That's how it ended up working. I don't know how it works that way, but that's what it ended up doing.
Yeah, exactly. And if we were using Bootstrap, we indeed would need to use the as attribute. And just to show the issue here, if I don't have the slashes, so remember,
It's absolute versus relative, right?
yeah,
So if there's no slash, it'll just start appending it to the end of the URL as a relative path versus if you have the slash, it's absolute. So it says, hey, from the root, go here.
yeah,
What he
I think I
said.
remember you yesterday running it and it would add things to the URL if you didn't have that. Like about repeatedly on the URL.
yeah. React, remember, slash by itself is a route, and it's the base route, and it also is used when we're writing like directories to indicate an absolute path versus a relative path. So without the slashes, these are interpreted as relative paths. So if I click on character, this is interpreted as a path relative to this current URL. So character gets added onto about. Well, actually,
Click it again.
yeah. I wonder if I
It
need.
might be because you need to refresh your page because you
Yeah,
had it right originally.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. I bet if I killed and restarted the server, it might work, but I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. Main thing is we want to have those slashes up front. On our
Would you
route.
try clicking about again now that we're on about?
Yeah, I did just add the slash back in here. Let me get rid of them. This is my sort of general, like, you know, kick the tires of the car, kick the engine is restart the dev server, do a hard refresh to clear the cache.
Would you click about again now that we're on about? Oh, it's working. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Um, I'll take it though because it is doing what we wanted to. We can
Weren't
look
we
at
initially having the issue with the href instead of two?
the href. Maybe you're right that it was when I was demoing href. Href had another issue as well, where like it would cause a page refresh. But I still say we leave this here, because we kind of saw that happening yesterday. I am going to real quick make a navbar component. Just because it's going to make life a lot easier to have all this stuff in a navbar. And so now over here, I can get rid of all of this and put it in my nav and just put it in my nav bar and make sure I'm importing the right nav bar. And now we've got stuff working. We can add in the rest of what we want with our nav bar. And we have the outlet here now. So let's just add in a page for all characters. And maybe I decide I want that first. And you know what? I want the about page to be last. And I also want my favorites page to be right after the home page. So that's sort of the typical page layout that you see for stuff like this. And now we have a pretty nice little navbar, though my inline CSS is a little hacky, and we've got a React Router application spun up. And now we can dive in to useParams. And just, I'm going to scroll down a bit just so we can like see an example of the code here. So it's pretty straightforward. We import the hook, we use it, it returns an object that we can destructure that will grab attributes from the page. Now, we have to do a little more work to tell React Router what this ID parameter is. If we look at our example here for the movie, we see that the path here now has the syntax of :/ID, and this indicates to React Router that this is a dynamic parameter. And we're going to code this up in just a sec. I also just want to real quickly, let's take a look at the useParams hook here, where again, we can see a nice usage example. They implement routes a different way. We could add multiple parameters if we wanted, and we can play around with that in a minute, and we can do a catch-all. And yeah, that's sort of the useParams hook in a nutshell. So to use useParams, we have to do two things, right? We have to modify path in router.jsx to have a URL param. And then we have to use the useParams hook to grab the param. So let's go to router and let's start with the character page because it sure would be nice to have an ID. So we now have a URL parameter. And now if I go to my character page, over here, let's import the useParams hook. And we'll just use it like that. And let's just console log the params just to see what this looks like. And then we'll build it out of it. Oh, excuse me. So if we go to our console and we go to our character page, well, interestingly, I have an error now. And this points out an issue. My route has changed, right? This ID property is no longer optional. So that works great. But this does mean I can't have this here in my navbar because it no longer matches the route. And that kind of makes sense because you can't click like this is the goal of this page is to look at an individual character. So which character would I be looking at here in the navbar? And I sort of, did this on automatic memory, but this is a really good thing to see because indeed, just because this is a dynamic parameter, it's still part of the URL and it has to be there. And I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions about useParams and this sort of like, fundamental demonstration of what it's doing and how it works. Nick, yes, sir.
Carlos had his hand up first.
Oh, thank you. And you know what, Andy, I think you had a question a while ago that I saw and totally breezed over, so I apologize. I'll circle back to you in just a minute. Carlos, yes, sir.
Is there a way, I'm assuming there's not, to make the ID param optional, essentially in that path? Or do
Uh,
you just have to make a separate route if you want to have two different, I guess, pages? So one with the param and one without it.
I would have to look. There might be a way to make it optional. The short answer is you don't really want to. You want to have two separate routes. Because again, think about the purpose of this URL. And in sort of terms of REST API design, this is a route or a path that uniquely defines a resource, right? So the goal of creating this route is this uniquely defines the character, a specific character, the one with ID 4. So we kind of want this to be required. We would just want it would be a different route without it. You, in fact, would probably run into a problem having it have the same name character. That's why the REST API convention is to view all the characters. It's plural here, so it's slightly different. Um, so yeah, short answer is you'd want a different route. Does
So
that
I
help?
guess you can have it. Yeah, yeah. So I guess you can have it initially go to your all characters, and once you click on a character, it'll redirect you to character with that /ID.
That is exactly what we're gonna do. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep, exactly. And we can have links that are like character/4 or character/3. Um, Nick, yes, sir.
Can you make it so the use params has more than one key value pair?
You
So
can.
like, so in your URL you have four. Uh, okay.
Oh, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. I was gonna say in your URL over on the right hand side, after
Mhm.
four, do you put like a and symbol and then something else, or how do you do that?
Yeah, you would do it like this.
Okay, so the parameters are separated by slashes in the path.
Exactly.
Everything after the base URL is the
Exactly.
arguments. Okay.
Yeah, and I could do it like this. Um, and let me we'll leave this here as an example, I think. So let me add this. Let me go to our character page and oh, we print all the params, which is great. So now this obviously is an invalid path. So I now have to do something and I can put whatever I want. And let's see what error I made.
I think you forgot a slash after the 4 on the URL itself.
Oh, I totally forgot a slash after the 4. Thank you. And you know what? This split screen is more trouble than it's worth. I apologize. Let's bring this out so we have a little more room here. There we go. And so we see here the params are both of these things.
So that's all so far. That's all the params are just everything after the base URL that we want that follows that colon. I don't know syntax.
It is exactly the colon.
Okay.
Yeah. It had like if I got rid, I'll show you in just a sec. Let me just kind of finish my little pathing examples here. So if I got rid of the colon here, this is the colon indicates it's a variable, it's a parameter. Now this literally has to be hard-coded foo. So it's a little bit of a magic string situation, right? But this is such a convention for like API routes and paths and URL paths that you'll see it in a bunch of different languages and situations. Yeah, great question. So I'm going to comment that out and I'm going to go back to just what we had before. So that just so as we continue building the app, it will be put together. And now I'm also going to very quickly just destructure this params object. And let's just grab the ID. This is the convention that you'll see. And so now let's do a little bit of modification of our code. Let's go to our nav bar real quick. This doesn't make sense here anymore to have an individual character. But let's go to our all characters page and let's put a couple characters in here. Let's maybe do a div and let's put one in here. We'll import the link. And we'll go to character 4. We'll make sure this works. Let's go to all characters. Yep. Let's in fact, just for now, just put something there just so we can see it. So now I can go to all my characters. I see my character with ID 4. Let's go back to all characters and do the same thing. And do it for a character with ID 3. And so now on all characters, I've got a character with ID 3 and a character with ID 4. The next step is we're actually going to hit the API to grab some data. I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions before we continue on. And Andy, I do apologize. I think I missed the question that you had earlier, so I just want to check in.
My question was really for the import stuff. When it came to the React router installation process and going step by step of making it work, is you guys have like a cheat sheet of like step by step format, one-stop shop for all these things? Because Tailwind was easy to install.
Yeah.
Wrap was easy to install, but when it comes to the React router, it doesn't fully explain it to you on their website of how to get that thing going. Of that.
We don't have a cheat sheet. The curriculum content from yesterday's lesson does, I think,
I went off of it. Yeah, that helped me. Is just in the future, if I have to do this over again and I don't have access to the curriculum,
Yep.
I would have access to that.
I think I think making a cheat sheet is a good idea. And I'll probably just take essentially what I have here and throw it in a markdown file. That said, you raised a good point about access to the curriculum. I recommend everyone clone the curriculum repo and have it on your computer so that you've got it offline if you want to look at it. Actually, in that vein, real quick, like for
Um,
instance,
I can make the cheat sheet myself. I was just wondering if there was one available already.
no, unfortunately, but it's a good idea. If you do make it, send it to me and I will add it to the curriculum. Let me just show you guys real quick kind of how I often navigate the curriculum. And you guys will continue to have access to like this Git repo for, ages after graduation and stuff. But like I also have the curriculum repo cloned. Um, and while initially opening it in VS Code might seem like a bit much, if I open up a lesson, and we do have some cheat sheets in here. We don't have one for React Router, and we should. I think that's actually a really good idea. Um, I That's something else, but let's just go to this cheat sheet that we have for. We've got Docker cheat sheets, we've got Django cheat sheets. I have some extra files in here. I've been playing around with like feeding this into an AI, and that's why we're seeing all these XML file results. But if I just open up, let's just go to, we should have some React Router cheat sheets. That's actually a good idea. But this cheat sheet, what I wanted to show people was if you do Command Shift P or Control Shift P and you type preview, there's a markdown open preview option that opens this in a nice to read way. So often when I'm looking over curriculum, like I'll do it like this. And I realize that's a small thing, but if you don't know it's there, then you don't know it's there. There's other ways to read markdown as well, but I've just gotten used to this. You can also, when I'm editing, I often do it like this. So there's a couple tools there. But honestly, having a cheat sheet for this is a great call. I don't think we have. Yeah, we don't have some cheat sheets here, and we should. So
Really, or anything. I don't. We should probably keep the instruction going. I didn't want to derail it too much.
yeah. No, I thank you for the reminder. I definitely got a little off track there. Yeah, coming back to our useNavigate and
What
useParams.
about? Never mind.
Oh, what's up?
Now I was about if I could, I'll find it later. But there's an awesome GitHub profile that has like everything, like IT related. You know what I'm talking. Have you
Yeah,
heard of it?
there's
The
like,
awesome.
yeah, I do. There's different ones out there, and it's like these amazing curated collections of stuff.
Yeah, like a lot of information, cheat sheets on Docker, everything you could even imagine. I can see if I could find it and put it in the chat.
That would be awesome. Yeah, if you can find it, drop it in our questions channel and tag me and Francisco on that. That would be great, actually. Thank you, Okaino. Okay, cool. I realized I detoured a little bit, which was totally not your fault, Andy. That was a good question, and I think we need some cheat sheets here. Coming back to our application though, and kind of taking it home. Now that we have this ID, now we can start to do interesting stuff with it on our character page. Uh, and I feel like I don't know why I was getting squigglies. Oh, because they're not used yet. So we're about to use it. So I've got this ID here, right? Let's go ahead and let's make a bit of React component state. Let's call it character ID, set character ID. And let me make sure I'm doing this the right way so I don't cause an infinite loop. Yeah, I apologize. We actually don't want use state for the character ID. I was thinking to like do something like this, but this is going to put us in an infinite loop. And it also looks like I'm getting a set character ID is not a function, which is, oh, because I need these to be brackets for arrays. And now we get our infinite loop. So this is not what we want. And in fact, we don't need it because we already have the ID. Right, and let's go ahead and let's just add a console log for our character page. Let's add a console log for ID param. What I want to do now is make an API call to the Game of Thrones API to get character info, and then put the character info in some component state. So let's make the API call first. I know I'm going to want to use a use effect for that. And what I want is when this character page loads, not loads as in a page load like refresh, but when I navigate here in React and this component renders for the first time, I know I'm going to grab the ID. So I just want this use effect to go ahead and fire the first time a page loads, the page renders rather. And so I can add an empty dependency array here. And let's create a function named getCharacterData. And we'll leave it empty for the moment. We'll just add a console log here. And we'll call it here inside our use effect. And this is going to make our API call. But now, if I clear my console and I go to all characters and I go here, I see that my component's rendering, the use effect is firing, and it's printing this console log. So I'm kind of getting my skeleton hooked up. So let's go ahead and let's build out our API call now. So this is going to be an async function. And we're going to do, let's just do const response equals axios.get. And I'm looking at some guide code here for this URL, but for the Thrones API. And I need to put the ID in here. So we're going to make this template literals. There we go. And put in our character ID.
Do we need an await in front of
Yeah,
Axios?
I was just thinking about that. Thank you.
And do we need to import Axios, right?
We totally do need to import Axios. Thank you. So now I'm successfully making an API call. If we look down here at this print statement, we see this getCharacterData function is fired by our use effect. Yeah, I think use effect seems to really like having this stuff defined inside. I'm not sure, to be totally honest, if it matters. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna ignore that for now. I think that might be some of my dev tools being overly persnickety. It doesn't make a huge difference for our purposes. And we can see here that my get call works. I get the response data. I'm console logging it. I've got Sansa, which is really exciting. I now need some component state to hold my character data. So now we are going to use useState with brackets because it's an array instead of. And I'm just going to make this long-winded so it's explicit and easier to read. And I want to avoid naming a character so I don't confuse it with the component name. So I'm just going to be very wordy. And we're just going to set this to be null. And now over here, we can set our character data to response.data. And now this is very exciting because I can now start adding in. Let's in fact just do a little destructuring here. We have ID, we have first name, we have last name. Let's actually just use full name. And we have title. And I'm looking here in this JSON response. Oh yeah, and we definitely need the family, right? That's what Game of Thrones is all about. And we have an image URL, which is awesome. So let's destructure all this from our character data object, just because it makes it a little easier.
Is it because we're already using ID?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to worry about it because we already have it. So that is the one danger of destructuring if you inadvertently have two variables with the same name. And I'm not sure why it says, oh yeah, I do know why it says cannot destructure property family of character data as it's undefined. So we are now running into a bit of an issue here. Right, and in fact, let's comment this out and let's just put div full name character data full name. And we run into this error, cannot read properties of undefined, reading full name, which is a little weird because I thought it's working, right? If I look up through my console logs, we connect, but then I see this type error and it happens before I even make my API call. So can someone tell me what's going wrong here? And we did cover this, but it's non-obvious.
My guess is because we're already on the page, it's not running well, I guess it is running the use effect.
Right. So it's running the use effect. This is a less obvious behavior of use effect. And until you see it, it doesn't really stick in your brain. When we set up use effect this way with the dependency array, use effect fires after the component mounts and renders for the first time. So the component actually mounts and renders. And when a component renders, it means it returns this JSX to be rendered. And so the component renders first and then use effect fires. And in fact, ChatGPT did such a good job explain use effect firing after component mount with empty dependency array. I remember when I was kind of struggling with use effect, ChatGPT did a great job of explaining. It also has the advantage of the text here is really big. So I think it's helpful to reinforce the point. The way that the React component lifecycle works, when we give use effect an empty dependency array, It fires only once after the component is mounted. And it doesn't run again, which is good because we only need to load this character data once, unless like the page refreshes. But it's a little weird, right? Because you don't think about this stuff getting rendered first and then this use effect firing, but that's exactly what's happening. The fix here is pretty easy, but I want to check in to see if this is sort of clicking with everyone as to what the problem that we're encountering is. Okay, I see a couple nods. I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions or stuff that you're curious about around this. Yeah, this is probably the least intuitive behavior of the React component lifecycle and use effect. Just to reiterate, when a component renders for the very first time, we call that mounting it onto the DOM. Because if we go in here and, well, we see the error right now, so we can't see it. But React sort of attaches our component to the actual browser DOM. And that's called mounting. And that's also the very first time it renders when it returns this JSX. And so the way React works, it mounts and renders first, and then fires the use effect second when this dependency array here is empty. So anyone have a thought as to what the fix is?
Would you do like a loading screen? Just render that first if the array is empty.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple different patterns that we can use. You can do a loading screen. You could have multiple return statements. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to do the use state?
We've got use state that we're using here. And indeed, we're going to look at this character data use state and see if it's empty or not. Because it's empty or null, right, by default. This is sort of the default value that use state sets until this is done. So we can kind of use this as our check and say, if there's nothing in here, we know the use effect hasn't fired yet, and we need to show a loading screen. So I could do, and let's just get rid of this. If no character data, return
Wouldn't you still need to wrap that in parentheses?
do I need to wrap it in parentheses? If it's just one thing, I might not have to. But it looks like, let's see, do I need to refresh? There we go. I just need to refresh the page. So we don't even see the loading screen because it happens so fast. Well, we see it very briefly, which is not a great user experience, by the way, having that flash, and we'll kind of see how we can improve that. But we see here the flow here of the character, ID param. Let's in fact just like add a console log here. Let's just say rendering. So we can really see the flow of everything. Oh, and I apologize. Let's put the rendering here. There we go. So we see our character component, this code starts executing from line 9 all the way up top. We see here, we print out the ID param. We see it doesn't fire the use effect. It prints this rendering statement. It goes into this if and returns. So we don't get here. So now the component's mounted, and now the use effect fires, and we see get character data. We see that data printed out, and then it renders again, right? Because we've changed our component state with set character data. So that causes the re-render that then shows what we want to see. Andy, yes, sir.
Yeah, just the thought here is like for the return, why would it render first? I know it's just out of the blue question now. I just something that kind of light bulb came up. So if it's a function, why would it skip through everything and go to a return to render the page?
Right. Yeah, great question. Let me refactor this a little bit to show the sort of way of doing this that's a bit cleaner with the ternary. And then I'll circle back to your question because I think it'll make the code easier to look at as well. And Daniel, I see you have a question as well. So bear with me just one moment, guys. So we're going to add a whole bunch of some JS in here. And we're going to do a ternary to look at our character data. And if it exists, we are going to render this stuff. And I'm going to wrap it in an extra div just to make everybody happy. And by everybody, I mean React.js. And otherwise, we're just going to return null. And let's look at this again, because I think, and now we can get rid of this if statement because the ternary does the same thing. It's a little bit of dealer's choice which style to use. I kind of like the if statement in return. The React standard is sort of the ternary. If stuff gets big enough, you can break this into separate components. But in most of our code and lessons, you'll see the ternary style, and it is very succinct. So that's what I want to kind of show us. And then Andy, I'll circle back to your question and Daniel, yours as well. So, and also this gives us a little less code to look at, which I think can make walking through this easier. So if we look through everything that's happening here with this component, we see on line 9, this print statement for character. Then we see on line 10, the IDs printed out. Then we see right from here to here, from here to here, we see that we've jumped from line 9 and this print statement to this rendering console log. And then we return null, we return nothing because we don't have any character data. So it's indeed skipped over this use effect. And so Andy, to answer your question, first off, this part here is just a function definition. So this is fine. This doesn't execute any code. Here's where the code actually gets executed. And the magic is in this arrow function that wraps the use effect. Because what we're doing here is not actually calling that function. We're passing that function definition that calls get character inside of it, but we pass it as an argument to use effect. So what happens is React decides when to execute the function we pass in as an argument to use effect. We don't directly control when that happens. What we do is we know the React component lifecycle and design our code accordingly. And this is, I think, one of the trickiest bits about React is we're used to this sort of like imperative style where I write code, right, sort of top to bottom, and the code, the flow of execution is top to bottom. And, you know, we figured out function calls and classes and stuff where like, all right, I call a function here, but I define it here. So then this code executes. But this is a little different. This does not get directly executed by us at all. It's executed by React, and React does it by looking at this dependency array. And then when we have this array as empty, the way React works is it actually executes this code in here after this component renders for the very first time, after it mounts. Andy, does that help answer your question a bit?
Yeah, so we just have to play along essentially.
That is exactly it. We have to play along. Um, and while it it is more complex, once you get used to it, the benefits are we get all the power of React. And like if you have multiple use effects, React guarantees that they happen in order. So if I need to make multiple API calls, React can kind of do that for us. The old version of the React docs used to have a great page on the React component lifecycle. I think it's a little hard to find it now with like the newer one. This lifecycle of reactive effects page might be useful. This is sort of the key part. Every React component goes through the same lifecycle. When it's added to the screen, when it renders for the very first time, it mounts. It updates if it receives new props or state, and it unmounts when it's removed. The rest of this, I think, gets more complex. But if you start thinking about React components of having this sort of continuous loop and this life cycle, it helps a lot in terms of thinking of how they work. Because whenever props or state change, it triggers this, right? Props change or state changes. And then use effect fires at certain times. And if in my use effect I had, and let me clear all this stuff. If I had this use effect would fire every time this bit of state changes, which is useful in certain situations. But the behavior here is it fires only once when the component mounts, and it happens after the initial mount. And indeed, we just have to play along, but the more you use it, the more useful it becomes. And I do recommend taking some time. I'll share this link as well. I'll make diagrams. Like I said, React is deceptively complex because it's no longer sort of imperative coding, and it's really like React is the layer between us and the DOM. Daniel, yes, sir. I know you had a question as well.
I want to ask in ChatGPT, but I'm going to ask if we would actually use it. So ChatGPT, because my question was, can we just basically hold the rendering of that one component until all of the data is there, and then we can just present the data instead of like flashing the screen and stuff like that. And then ChatGPT was saying that you can use React.lazy and suspend the loading until of that component or rendering of that component until all the data is there.
That's quite possibly correct. I honestly don't know a lot about React.lazy. It gets super powerful. React Router also has something called a loader, which can do something similar. Let's see.
And it looks like you could still pass in, like if it's a long load time, you can still pass in a loading screen per se. But if it's like kind of like how it is almost instantaneous with this application, it'd just be best to just not render anything until.
Yeah, let's take a look at what React Router's option and maybe we'll briefly look at React Lazy and then we'll break. But again, I want to emphasize React is extremely complex, and we're only scratching the surface here. It does an awful lot of stuff. We're sort of focusing on the meat and potatoes. So one way to do it is React Router has what's called a loader, where I would put this get character data code here. I think we could grab the URL param, but I'd have to double check. That's the only thing we'd have to really dig into. And then it guarantees that the component doesn't render until the data is grabbed with the loader. React Lazy probably does something similar. You defer loading a component's code until it's rendered for the first time. So this sounds different. This sounds like it might be more about like when this code for the whole component is actually imported. But I'm not sure about that. I would be a little careful with lazy. I'm not sure if it's the right tool for the job here. It could be. Just from looking at this, it makes me a little skeptical, but I honestly don't know enough to know. The React router loader is sort of explicitly designed for this scenario. But honestly, you will see this pattern all the time, all the time. And what I would recommend is start here, get comfortable with this pattern, because like it or not, this is how React works. This use effect doesn't fire till this component renders for the first time. So rather than like trying to avoid the React component lifecycle, let's just use it. And once you see this, this is not such a bad approach at all. And as you indicated, there's different ways to do stuff. Like you could add a loading animation here. You could render a different component. React loader, lazy loading. There's a lot of different strategies here. If you do get that working with React Lazy, let me know. I would love to see that. Like this, for instance, this character data might end up being broken down into a component, though it still doesn't really solve our issue. Yeah, again, this is such a common pattern though, because it comes up all the time, not just with use effect, but where maybe, maybe for some reason, some Game of Thrones characters don't have a house or family rather. So in that case, I might need to do something like this. Use a ternary to check if it's there, or if not, say, they have no family, which sounds appropriately stark for Game of Thrones. And just to demo this, let's use a non-existent property. Let's do it over here, right? Let's force it to be false. Right, so this ternary pattern of how to deal with if some data doesn't exist is extremely useful, not just for use effect. All right, I've been going on for a while. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? But we've made good progress here. After the break, what we'll see is I'll briefly show useNavigate, which is pretty straightforward, and then we'll dive into React Router outlet context, which is really the big one for today. There might be a little more building up, like we can maybe, we can grab all the characters now that we know how this works. So we can do a little review and refresher there, but then we're going to spend most of our time looking at outlet context, which is how we're going to implement this favorites page. And Andy, did you have a question or is your hand up from before?
Yeah, just before you step away, could you
Yeah.
just show me where that get character data is being fired off?
Yeah.
Because I don't see it here.
This function right here.
Yeah.
Totally. So
Oh, it's right there. Use effect. Okay.
yeah. And in fact, hold on a sec here. Let me just do it this way. Give me 1 sec here, guys. Let's just call it handle get character data. And we'll make it look like that. So this refactoring of my code does exactly the same thing as before. And this, I think, can kind of illustrate it a bit, where we can see, in fact, I don't actually execute this anywhere in this function. I define it here. And then in this other function I define, I say, hey, when you execute handle get character data, execute this function. But I never actually execute handle get character data. I pass it in as an argument to useEffect, right? And then the useEffect hook is how we hook into React's component lifecycle. And React says, okay, I should fire off this function after the component mounts.
So it's just essentially it's on standby after everything renders.
Yeah, exactly. That's a much better way to put it. That's exactly it. Like
All right.
with the useEffect hook, we're putting this on standby. And then in this array, we tell React when to use it. And with the array empty, it uses it after it renders. If I put in a bit of component state here, or or if we had some other component state for whatever reason, like let's actually do just foo. This is a much better example because this has to be component state. Maybe foo is like refresh the character for some reason because we know the API has changed. So whenever foo changes, it would fire this off again. Yeah, great question, man.
Yeah,
Great
sorry.
question. And that's a
Just
great way to describe it. That's exactly it. With useEffect, we give it a function that's on standby until whenever in the life cycle we use it. So it's on standby until after the component renders. All right, let's take 10, folks. Great questions and great walking through this. And when we reconvene, we'll do a little more code in this vein, and then we'll dive into outlet context, which is pretty cool. So thank you very much, and I'll see everyone in 10. All right, we've been diving into useEffect, which is really, really good. And I've added a bit more code here to our character component so we can really see it in action. So first off, I grabbed an image, which is awesome because it makes this way more visual and fun. So the character with ID for it is Sansa from Game of Thrones. And I've also added a console log here. And I've added a second use effect down here. And I suppose for fun, we could actually put these not in order. And so now these use effects fire in opposite order. But I want to point out that in the second use effect, which is on standby for when this character data state changes, this is what's firing these console logs. So let's walk through the flow of execution based on console logs and see what's happening. Let me get my little zoom annotator here. So we see first that the component's mounting, which we see over here, right? And we've created some component state. We see this console log of ID param4. We see it then jumps all the way to rendering, right? This function is defined, but not executed. This function is defined, but not executed. This use effect puts this code on standby, but because we've put a state variable, some component state here in the dependency array, it's on standby until character data changes. And when the component mounts, when it mounts to the DOM and renders for the very first time, character data hasn't changed yet. It's still null. This other use effect puts handle get character data on standby for after mount. And we haven't finished mounting and doing our first render. And so we see render it. Now it looks like I may have to eat my words because, yeah, this is. Yeah, let's see if I scroll down a bit here. What do we see? Yeah, so I have to eat my words a little bit because React does, I believe it guarantees that use effects fire in order. Sorry about that. I should be logged in. But actual execution timing may not be predictable. So effects are scheduled in order of declaration. So this is like a little weird because we see this second use effect firing twice. I would have, if we change the order of the use effects, it's going to change around a little bit. Like if we now put this one here, our console logs are going to change. Like right now, we see rendering, second use effect. There's actually character data there, which sure seems weird because we haven't called get character data yet. And to some degree, this points to the asynchronous nature of JavaScript and React. We don't get like 100% guarantee that these console logs are exactly executed in order. And like if I keep scrolling here, we see again rendering and then the second use effect happening again after our API call, which is weird, right? So that tells us React is kind of doing some stuff under the hood. I've moved around the order of the use effects. Note though that everything still works. And clearly this second use effect, like no matter what the console logs say, we're seeing character data printed out here. So even though the console logs don't show our API call happening first, it must have because we got the data. So I've moved around the order of the use effects. So now we have handle character data and our sort of console logger one. And when I refresh the page, let's look at the order of the print statements now. And I need to save my file. That would certainly help. And now it's a little different. I'm actually a little surprised this worked the way it did. If we see, we have, again, the character, the ID param, rendering, we see get character data. Then we see the second use effect firing, which is what we would expect. I'm actually a little surprised to see get character data undefined here. Because we then see this console log got character data, setting get character data. We then set character data. We then see once we do set character data, that causes a re-render because we've changed component state, which is what we would expect. We see the character, we see ID param4, we see rendering. We see the second use effect firing when state get character data changes, which is what we would expect to see. We see it here. And then we see the character data printed and rendered. Um,
Does character data, when you have it up there in the top, does it initialize? Like, does it, like by declaring it, is it initializing it as a blank thing, and that's why it's triggering that second use effect? Is because
uh,
it's technically changing because it's being initialized?
no, no. The reason is I always forget about this with use effect, and I in fact let me just put my question into ChatGPT because this is what I was doing off screen. Does use effect fire on mount even if state is in dependency? Right. And this was exactly what I got confused about the other week because I forgot this. And it's simply use effect always fires on mount. So, and their example here is very similar to our scenario. And so, like, use effect is this one is firing twice by design.
Once on mount and once when character data changes.
Yeah, exactly. Once on mount and once when character data changes. Which again, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little weird, right? And if we look at this, this is a little weird. I find it a little weird that putting use effect after change stuff, but I'm not sure that we get a strong guarantee necessarily about that because the whole point of React is that this takes X number of milliseconds, right? And even console logs and stuff do. So the use effects, they don't just put stuff on standby, they also sort of help control flow of execution and make sure that like certain things don't happen until other things are done. And we can kind of see here why that matters. Carlos, yes, sir.
Sorry, my keyboard's being weird. Um, so is there a way of taking away that behavior? So instead of having it not fire on mount, or if it does have to fire on mount every time, regardless of whether or not you have dependencies on it, do you just have to put in some logic in your function that runs on that use effect?
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I don't think there's a way to take it away. Um, we can double check, but I'm pretty sure. Is there a way so use effect doesn't fire on mount? Okay, and basically this is exactly what you were saying is we could this is frankly overkill using a a ref hook, which is something else. And basically to check if we've rendered yet or mounted yet. What would make more sense here is we just say like if no character data, you know, or rather we say like if character data exists, then we do these console logs, otherwise we don't. So like in both these examples, the use effect still fires, it just doesn't do anything. So that would be the pattern to use.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Does order of use effect declaration matter? So use effects are called in the order that they appear. But as we can see that's a little, it can get a little counterintuitive. It can be helpful, like if I need to make sure one API call happens after another, like it can be useful for that. Like if I wanted to have a use effect here that was like do something after I get character data, then it can be good for that. But to be oh no, I lied. In fact, they're telling us here that we shouldn't rely on this for dependency between effects. So this part of use effect, I find a little confusing, to be totally honest, and I would probably need to dig into it a bit more. And this is where I think React starts to get a little more complex. And in fact, they're telling us here on dependency change, React logs them in the reverse order. Don't ask me why. So I think the short answer here is, as they're showing us here, if we need to control order, we actually want to combine stuff. And we would have like two asynchronous function calls, and we would use async and await to control our execution flow. Or we use some state change like we see here. So these are the two sort of better patterns. Andy, yes, sir.
In the background, it seems like to optimize your DOM and how it loads up as trying to make it as fast as possible, it would mean a lot. But if it's like a small project and you're not seeing the background stuff, this approach would still work, right? Without trying to optimize things.
Yeah, that's correct. This approach will work for a small or a big project. It has more value on a big project when there's like more to put onto the DOM, in fact. So I mean, React is kind of in some ways heavyweight for what we're doing. But yeah, this approach works in both scenarios.
Is there an alternative to use effect?
No, not really. Again, like this part starts to get a little weird, right? I think this is the answer here. We don't really want to depend on the order of things for coordination. We would use like async and await. That gives us like stronger control of the order of things. Like, because this is an async function, I can do this here, and if I also did, get something else. Axios.get. Maybe we do like HTTPS. This is not a great thing to do, but just to, let's see here. Search Q equals Sansa. So search Q equals character data first name, relies on character data being set. This is going to return a massive amount of stuff if it works at all. But because we have like, I believe with the two async functions, we would get control flow here. Or if we really wanted to do it, we could actually do it like this and then not use component state. We could do like response.data.first name. Because with these two awaits, we get a strong guarantee from JavaScript that this one doesn't execute until this one is done. So those would be the two possible ways to handle that. Which is a little more complex. And to be honest, as you can tell, like I constantly sort of have to review this stuff as I do it because it does get a little tricky. I don't want to get too lost in the sauce here because we did go down this rabbit hole a bit, so I apologize, but I do want to kind of switch over and start building out our all character page. so we can see use outlet and use it for favorites. I will just say right now with use effect, like what we're seeing here with like this one scenario, this is like 80%, like 80 to 90%, as is this. Right, and we can, let's put our if statement here, because I think this is good to have for sort of documentation purposes. You know, don't fire on mounts as character data not loaded yet. So the use effect 2 still fires, but we just have it not ignore the stuff we don't want it to do. And let's just put in here console.log. So this pattern that we see here, even this, you won't have to do as much, but this covers 99% of what you guys will be doing with React. It definitely more than covers what you'll need to do on the assessment, and it covers probably 80 to 90% of what you'll do with use effect in your personal projects. And so now if I go to character with ID3 and we're looking at ARIA, and we kind of look through our flow here, we see the component mounts, it renders, use effect 1 fires first, it calls get character data, use effect 2 fires, but we don't see this stuff in here happen. We then, oh, this time it worked. So this is a great example. Note how this time, see, we actually got stuff in our use effect. Do you guys see what I'm saying? While before this was null. This is because this HTTP request is asynchronous and it takes a different amount of milliseconds every time. So I think this time we just got lucky. Let's see here. Well, I also think it's the if statement. Let's see, if we do this enough times, will we?
Can you try a different ID?
Yeah, I wonder if it matters. That's a good idea. No, it looks like now we're getting it. I can't imagine the console logs I added. Like this should not have made the difference. Interesting. Now character data undefined. Let's add this back in. So that is just weird. I don't have a solid answer there. I feel like we're kind of delving into the guts of React. And in fact, here we see with the if statement gone, it works. So I think what we're hitting now is exactly like the asynchronous nature of HTTP calls. And to a degree, like React batching state changes and rendering, but I suspect it's the HTTP call that is a part of what's causing the change here. It's taking a different amount of milliseconds each time. Okay, why don't we take 5, just because I realized that we got a little lost in the sauce there. That way we can kind of like cleanse our brains and we can switch over. Does that sound good, or do people want to keep rolling? Any strong opinions one way or the other?
I think we're good to go.
All right, let's keep rolling then. I'm good to go. I just wasn't sure because I feel like this was a little lost in the sauce here. And again, I think the big takeaway is that, HTTP calls genuinely are asynchronous. And so in some ways, what we're seeing here is like use effect, like doing its job of controlling stuff. So let's go to the all character page and let's make this more real so that we don't have this just hard coded in. So we're also going to use some component state here, and we're going to use useEffect, and we're going to do something very similar to what we were doing before. I have a little outside noise happening. Can you guys hear that, or is the audio good? Okay, awesome. So we'll leave this here. I'll just put a little H3 hard coded. We'll come back to that later, and we'll put an H3 here that says generated. And I want to do characters data dot map, and then for each individual character, and this probably, I'm not even going to worry about lists and list items. I want to do something very similar to what we have right here. Which is character / c.id. And we can put their name here instead. And it will be the full name, I believe. And let's see, do I have a,
I think you need to wrap the literal with the curly brackets.
oh, thank you. And so now we run into this type error, cannot read properties of undefined, because we're calling .map on undefined or null, because there is no value here. So this is a great example of where I actually want an empty default value. So why does this work okay when before we ran into an issue? And this is about JavaScript and not about React. And the answer is .map does something very useful by default. If an array is empty, .map never calls this function. So here, by setting an empty array as our default value, we actually make life a whole lot easier, because this is still an array. We can still call .map on it, but this never gets called. And give me just one moment, folks. I need to close a window because there's some external noise here that's making it a little difficult for me to hear myself. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So I just want to check in to see if everyone's tracking on the value of setting the empty array here, and why we don't run into an error with this. Okay, awesome. I'll take that as a yes or a mostly yes. So let's build this out. We're going to use useEffect again. We've kind of checked it out, so it's going to be a bit more straightforward now. We're going to write a get characters function. That's going to be an asynchronous function. And I'm going to need to import Axios. And I'm just going to follow the same pattern that we did before. Axios.get. And in this case, the URL is Thrones API, API v2, characters. And let's just console log response data to see what it looks like. And now let's use a useEffect. And let's call get characters. And I want my useEffect to fire once after the DOM initially mounts. And this component initially mounts, excuse me. And now if I look over here, let's clear this and see if we have any errors that we need to worry about. We don't. We see that we get a big old array of characters. So this is awesome. So let's go ahead and let's use this. And we should be seeing our character data now. So I'm a little unsure. So we indeed do see the character data getting rendered. So this is probably just a typo on my part. We can see here, and I'll add in a console log here. Again, the behavior of useEffect firing after mount, where initially this state is empty when the component first renders or first mounts, then useEffect fires, and then we have our data. So I'm a little unsure why we're not getting lists here. It almost definitely means I have some sort of silent error.
Do you need to add a key to it?
Oh, I definitely do need a key. That's a good call. Let's do key equals c.id. I don't think that's what's causing the issue. Let's see, characters data. You know what? This might be an object. Let's do characters data.length to make sure this is indeed an array. Yep. So this tells me it sure looks like I'm mapping the right thing. So chances are I have something wrong here. So let's just see about doing something really simple. And let's see if that works. And let's make sure too, I've got my object structure right. Yep, there's an ID prop. So let's see what happens. Interesting. Characters. So that's good, because that tells me I'm using the right bit of component state. Objects are not valid as a child. That's fine. We're going to map it, and we're going to use the value C. And let's just do a div. And let's see if we just put in C, what happens. There we go. So I'm not sure exactly what I was doing wrong there, folks. Clearly there was something that was causing a silent error there, but now we're getting what we want, which is a list of IDs. So let's change this to full name. And by the way, my own little term for the debugging technique I use there is get rid of code until it works, basically simplification. And it's a really useful technique. Because as you can see, I don't know what I did wrong. I still don't know what I did wrong. But once you can isolate it to an area, you can fix it that way. So now we've got full names. And now we can replace this with the link component. And now we can start getting fancier, right? Let's go ahead and I wonder if the issue is I didn't have a return statement. I want to make sure I don't get too screwed up in my formatting here. So let's put a div here. And the link goes in the div. And really this belongs as its own separate component. That's what would make this easier.
You're closing the map before you close the div.
Oh yeah, with the closed parentheses. Thank you. Yeah, this is where it's getting a little funky with the syntax, though it still works. Right, missing key prop, excellent point. Not the problem, but definitely something that we need. So we'll just do c.id. So this is where like this clearly should be its own component, and it'll make it way less likely for me to have an error here. And so now we can do link to character slash c.id. And with luck, I forgot. So here we did run into that issue that we were talking about before of relative versus absolute paths, where the link is adding on as a relative path, which is not what I want. So let's hop back a bit here. And now I've got my characters. And this is where React Router starts to get cool, right? And this is the power of the URL param. And I can email, to my friend and say, Joffrey's a terrible human. Here's a link to his page. And it opens up in a new tab and it loads because React grabs this URL param and then we use it to make the API call like we were seeing before. So I want to check in and see what questions folks have about this implementation here. People feeling pretty good about the code and the logic and how these pieces are working together? Okay, awesome. Let me briefly show you guys useNavigate just to demo it, and then we'll dive into the outlet context. So let's change this hard-coded stuff a little bit. I'm just going to have one person here. And let me show you how to use the useNavigate hook and talk a little bit about why. So I'm going to import it from React Router DOM. And useNavigate is pretty straightforward. As it says here, it returns a function that lets you navigate programmatically in the browser in response to user interactions or effects. So imagine that someone fills out a form, and when they click submit on the form, we want React Router to take them somewhere. Well, that's a submit button, right? So we can't really use the link component here. So useNavigate does the same thing as link, but it lets us control it in code. And this is sort of exactly the example that we're about to build out. And so if we ever need to do redirection for any reason, like maybe someone logs in, right? That's a great example of where you need to use navigate or log out. We can use navigate, and you use it like this. We're going to need to, I'm just gonna, let's just grab it right. I kind of like organizing stuff at the top. And we're going to use navigate returns a function. And we're going to use that function in just a second. And so over here for my hard-coded example, let's make this a button. And let's do just manual redirect. And we're simply going to do navigate. And we put in a path, just like we would with link, that we could hard code or we could have be dynamic. And then on click, we can call the manual redirect. And so now, fingers crossed, I'm going to click on this button. And it takes me to Sansa Stark. Though for some reason, interesting. So I'm not sure what caused that issue there, that little hiccup that we saw. But we can see this in action now. And in fact, we can see it seems to be taking a little longer to load Sansa, which again just points to the fact that API calls truly are asynchronous, even though they're fast. Do folks have any questions about useNavigate? Okay, awesome. Now, oh, Carlos, yes, sir.
So actually, I'll hold off until after you explain what you're about to do. Because right now, navigate just looks to me like you're just using a link. So I'm hoping we'll cover it a little more.
Nope, this is about all we're covering with Navigate, so I'm glad you asked. You're exactly correct. Think about though when someone logs in. When someone logs into your app, we probably want to redirect them from the login page to a home page. So when I click that login button, I want my code to do the routing, right? There's not really a link component in that same way. Or if someone logs out. I think those are really good examples of where like we want to be able to programmatically control like the routing and the navigation. Does that help answer your question?
I think so. I might just have to like actually use it and play around with it.
Yeah. It does the exact same thing as Link. Again, it's just imagine that I log in. I need to do a bunch of stuff when I log in, right? Not just when I click the login button, it's not just about going from the login page to the home page. We might also need to, make an API call to authenticate user and get their data. And then we would want to redirect user to homepage. So I can't do that with a link component, but if I have a button where when that button is clicked, I can do these things, then I can accomplish that. And that's when I would want to use navigate.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking, because I probably didn't break it down as well as I should have the first time around. And you're exactly right. It basically does the same thing as link, and it's really just for those few specific scenarios where we need it. All right, let's talk about outlet context. And for this one, I'm going to go to our curriculum because Francisco made a pretty awesome diagram. So this is sort of the big one. And we've kind of been working up to this. Use outlet context actually uses something called React context, which I'll talk about a bit later. Well, let's actually take a quick look at React context. So React context is here to solve the problem of prop drilling, as they call it. And prop drilling is the problem of, imagine you have, you know, like tons of components. You know, I have an app, I have a home page, maybe I have a character card, and I can pass data down as a prop from one into the next, and from one into the next, and from one into the next, and from one into the next. But at a certain point, this becomes a real pain. Right? Do you guys kind of get what I mean when I say prop drilling? I see a couple nods. And honestly, 3 or 4 layers is not bad. But if it's like 4 or 5 or 6 and it's a big application, it's a big pain in the butt. And there's a bunch of different state management libraries, like as our state gets really complex. But the React team created context that basically does the prop drilling for us, right? As it says here, passing props can become verbose and inconvenient if you have to pass them through many props in the middle, or if many components in your app need the same information. Think about if we weren't using Tailwind or we weren't using Bootstrap, if we had to implement dark mode on our own, every single prop might need to know if dark mode is on or off, right? That's a great example. Or like user data. Once we add like login and authentication, like username, we might want to pass everywhere. So React context lets the parent component make some information available to any component in the tree below it, no matter how deep, without explicitly passing it through props. And in fact, this is kind of already happening. We go here to our component tree, we're going to see React context uses this term, a provider. And if we go down here, I don't know if the props get passed, but we see all these different providers. And so the idea is, and we see here outlet and we see context provider, and we haven't used any of this stuff yet, but React context has a provider and then a consumer. And if you have to have the provider be at the parent level, but then any child, anything inside the provider can consume stuff that the provider gives it. And we'll see what this looks like in a second. So here's a nice little diagram of like a component state tree and prop drilling. And let's see, I just want to get to their example. And then we'll see this with outlet context. So yeah, they don't put all the code in one place. I think it's going to be easier for us to just show it. But essentially, you create some context. And then you use a hook, of course, called useContext that lets you grab it. So I think the React docs here, because I don't want to go too deep into React context, I just want to point out that this is actually a React feature that React Router is leveraging. And I think the easiest thing to do is for us to build this and see it in action and then talk about it. And a great example here of this is for favorites. Because Excuse me. I might want to have an array of my favorite character IDs. But now I run into a challenge of, I think it might be cool. I don't need to pass it into the nav bar, but it would be cool so that if I go here, I could see if a character is a favorite or not. And when I go here, I could see if a character is a favorite or not. And when I go here, I see a list of those favorite characters.
When you're in your character page, could you also make it to where you can click a button that would set the favorite and it would pass it all the way back up to the parent?
Exactly. Exactly. And we want to do that as well. I want to be able to favorite and unfavorite a character. So to scroll down here to this awesome diagram, this is what we're going to use outlet context to accomplish. And this is sort of like a nice diagram. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close to our application, right? This isn't header. This is navbar, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. And so with context, I'm going to have it's in fact a prop. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not want that to happen. We'll build it in just a moment, and I think that will be the easiest way to see it. But I wanted to start with this diagram because I think this diagram does a really good job of laying out the React component tree, and we can see the challenge is that like none of these are directly rendered. So how can the outlet pass data into all of them? And the answer is React context. And if we go to the second diagram here, this is what we're going to do, where we have our state and our state update functions living in the top level in the app. And I want to be able to, through outlet context, pass really them into all of them. So let's put this in action. So I have favorites. I have set favorites. Let me go ahead and just make some helper functions here for adding someone to a favorite and removing from a favorite. So we're going to just pass in the character object. And in fact, let's have this just be like array of favorite characters to keep it simple. Though we can maybe modify it later. And what we can do is first, let's check if favorites is in there. And we'll say if favorites there, let's just console log favorite already in list. Else set favorites. We take the favorites and we'll just add the character to the end of it. And that's a pretty good start. We'll worry about removing favorites a bit later. Let's just start with adding our favorites to the list. So now I run into the challenge of how do I pass this stuff down? And how do I use context now that we've been talking about it and I've been talking it up? The good news is using context is really simple. I'm going to make an object. And I'm going to just take advantage of the JavaScript shorthand where if the attribute name is the same as the variable we're setting it to, I can just do this. And the outlet prop, or the outlet component, excuse me, has a prop called context. And I can just pass in an object. So if I wanted to, I could hard code it. But I think for sort of teaching purposes, it can be useful to separate it out. And we'll do it like this. And in fact, let's just do this just for fun. Let's just add that other property on there. And so now, any component that's a child of the outlet, any component that's a child of the outlet can grab that context object using a hook. So let's start with the character page. And let's go ahead and let's use that useOutletContext hook and grab it and add an add favorites button. So up here in our imports, we're also going to import useOutletContext. And over here, we're going to, I think it's add to favorites. And then there was definitely foo, useOutletContext. And then we in fact had the list of favorites. And let's just start by console logging foo to make sure that this works and I did this right. And then we'll implement the code. So let's go here, let's go to all our characters and let's go look at Daenerys. And it looks like I did something wrong here because I see foo from context is undefined. So I forgot to actually call the hook function. And now if I look from here, I see foo from context bar, if you guys see this right here. So I'm indeed successfully grabbing this variable. So let's build out our character page. Let's add a button. Add to favorites. And on click, we will call the add to favorites function. And we'll pass in our character data. And let's also use that ternary syntax again. It'd be really nice to check if this person is already a favorite or not. And in fact, I'm going to steal, let's just do const is favorite equals favorites dot filter. And what we're going to do here is in fact, can someone remind me, does JavaScript have a function these days that I can just use to check if something is in a list?
Includes.
Thank you. Let's see if we can use it for an array of objects. So it looks like find might be a bit closer. What I'm used to is filter, but then you have to like check the length of the array. So I think find accomplishes our goal here because I need this comparison operation. With an array of objects, includes can get a little tricky. So I think find is just a bit safer. So let's try favorites find FID. And let's in fact just, for purposes of readability, convert that to a Boolean, though there's a couple ways to do that. Carlos, yes, sir.
If we go back to if you do it the filter route or the filter way, then you can just check if its favorite is empty or not, and that would give you a truthy falsy, right?
That's true. I can. And it's a little bit of an argument which one is better. To be honest, I'm not sure that this ends up being that much cleaner, but they both will accomplish the exact same thing. And in fact, before find existed, that was exactly how you would do it, which is kind of, I started that way and then it was like, we should try to use more modern JS. So let's see here. Add to favorites, favorite already in list. That's a good sign. If I do a hard refresh, is favorite is false. Interesting. It looks like I'm hitting favorite already in list maybe more often than I should. Let's see what's going on in app.jsx real quick here with add to favorites. I think the easiest thing to do here is console.log, add to favorites, console.log, favorites. So clearly my logic here is wrong. And in fact, let's try having, and in fact, it's probably the same issue because a filter returns an array and I forgot to grab the 0th element. So let's try favorites.find. And now that looks like it's working, though I'm not sure that I'm adding the favorite correctly. Let's see. Add to favorites. It's an object. There we go. That's more of what I was expecting to see. And if we try to do it again, favorite already in list. And we only see one thing here. So it looks like this is working correctly. If I navigate to all characters and we go to Sam, it looks like I have it. I do have an error in my code on line 48 in characters. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm not sure. So there's still some things to be worked out with add to favorites. I also, what I want to do is over here, I want to put this button inside some logic. And I want to say if they're already a favorite, just let's show a div that says is favorite. And if they're not a favorite, we'll show the button. And it's interesting. I'm not sure why that image disappeared because I'm pretty sure if I go to all characters and I go to Sam, we might be hitting a silent error. Let's see here. So this looks like a silent error. Nope, it looks like it's just slow. So that seems to be working. If I go to all characters and I go to Daenerys, so it looks like I do have an issue here in my code with the favorite logic. Let's see if we can fix this. Cannot read properties of undefined ID. It's clearly not coming from line. Here it is. F.ID character ID. So I think the issue here is when this favorites array is empty, maybe is causing a problem. Something is causing something I have not right here in this logic. And so again, I think the easiest way to debug is let's add a couple console logs and figure this out real quick.
It wouldn't have to be in a use effect, would it?
No, it doesn't have to, it shouldn't have to be in a use effect. Because one moment here, I just want to make sure I get my syntax right. Good enough. Because we're not dealing with any side effects. We already have the favorite passed in, and we're just basically deriving from this list of favorites, and we already have the character data. So we already have all the data that we need. We're just looking through it to see if a character is in there or not. So let's just console log, and let's just say checking if favorite. Let's console log the favorites list. Let's console log F. Let's console log character data. And between all of those console logs, we should be able to figure out pretty quick what the issue is. And we also, what's up?
Line 50, are you wanting to print out a variable or just the string favorites?
Oh, I do want to print out this variable. Thank you. And we know that the error seems to happen once I've added one favorite. So let's just refresh. Let's see here. Is favorite is false. Doesn't seem to be an issue. Let's go to all characters. Let's go to Sam. So we see is favorite is false. This array is empty. So find isn't even doing anything, which is good, which is what we want. So let's add Sam. So no error yet. We see checking if favorite. We see the favorite has one person in them. It's Sam. F is what we expect. Character data is what we expect. Is favorite is false, which doesn't seem, oh, because I need to return now that I've modified this. So now is favorite is true. So now let's go to a character and clear this. And let's look at Daenerys. And we see our error like we expect, but now we should have some good data to debug with. So if we go through here, we see they check if favorite, and then character data is undefined. Okay, so it looks like what I forgot to do here is deal with the is favorite checking happening on the first render. So there's a couple solutions to this problem. And let me look quickly at my guide code to kind of see, I think, the best way to do this. So there's two ways to solve this problem. One way would be we like lift all this logic up into app, which in a lot of ways makes sense. And does everyone kind of see the problem that we're running into here, by the way, just to check in? Okay, awesome. And this is a great example of how, like, we haven't added that much complexity, right? But there's enough complexity now where, like, this is a very common kind of error that you would see because it's the sort of the first render issue of I'm mounting this character page component for the first time, but I haven't fetched my character data yet, so I can't check if they're a favorite or not. So I think the answer here is the function is fine. The logic is fine. We need to change when we call this function so that we call it once we already have the character data. So we can probably put it, in fact, inside the second use effect that we created. Or maybe what we do is we put it like here after this async function inside handle get character data. That could be a good place to do it as well. In some ways, or we actually, what would be even better is we call it right here. And I think that's going to be the easiest change to make. So I've kind of modified this code a lot already. I'm returning a comparison that's a Boolean, so I don't think I need to cast this to a Boolean. And I don't want to call this right away. I want to wrap it in an arrow function. And this is probably too many layers of wrapping, but that's because it's a lot of console logs. So this is in fact a really tiny one-line function. I just have a zillion console logs here. But the console logging helped me fix it. And so to solve this issue, we can just go over here because we already have this ternary check to make sure that we don't render any of this stuff until we have our character data. So I can just call my function. The other way, I could have maybe passed character data in as an argument. That could have been a bit cleaner. We may, in fact, end up lifting this up and refactoring it because it's kind of nice to use this logic in multiple places. But I think this should solve the bug for now. Let's see what happens now. I add Daenerys to favorites. I go to all characters. I go to Brandon. We'll give him a minute. The image is maybe taking forever to load. But we don't see an error, and we see we can add Brandon to favorites. What's up with the image? I'm not sure. That might be the API. So let me just pause and check in and see if folks have questions. Yep, and there Brandon finally loads. Because I got a little lost in the sauce there, but I want to see how people are feeling about this add to favorites logic and the basic idea here of outlet context. Andy, yes, sir.
Could you just do a brief one over for what was the issue that we didn't see initially
Yeah.
and then how we came to the solution?
Yeah, totally. So my error was right here on line 55, character data, and we get character data from an API call. And so the very first time the component mounts and renders, we don't have character data yet. And the way I had written this before was I was executing this code right away. And so it was executing the first time the component mounts, and we didn't yet have the character data, and character data was null. And so that was what was throwing the error. And then the solution was don't execute this code right away, turn it into a function and call the function here because this is already wrapped in this ternary logic to make sure that we don't do any of this stuff until we have the character data. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Awesome. Great question. And I apologize for getting a little lost in the sauce there. Let's build out the favorites page so we can see a little bit more work with outlet and so we can see our characters here. And then we can play a little bit more with these patterns. So now that I have to deal with showing favorites here, I kind of like the idea of like, I don't want to have to reduplicate all this code that I just did. I actually kind of like the idea of making it a component. So I think along the way, we're going to create a character card. But before we do that, let's just use outlet context on the favorites page just to do some really simple work. So I'm going to go to my favorites page. I'm going to import useOutletContext. I'm going to destructure the object, the context object that useOutletContext returns. And I'm going to console log, and I'm going to just say we're on the favorites page. And I'm going to console log favorites. And again, to kind of go back to this diagram, remember that since all of our page components are rendered as children inside the outlet, they all have access to the outlet context. Our nav bar, for instance, does not, right? If I go here and I look at my component tree, and we look at all the components here, we can see here's our app, here's our nav bar, and the nav bar and the outlet are siblings. The nav bar is not inside the outlet. So if I tried to use outlet context in the nav bar, it would fail, right? But then here, in fact, we see a React context.provider component, and React Router creates this for us. And then down here, we see favorites. We in fact see there's a bunch of providers because the favorites component is a child of outlet, as is all characters or the about page or all of our pages. We can use the use outlet context. And if I look here on my favorites page, I see indeed that I have my favorites. And I just want to check in to see if folks have questions around this behavior of use outlet context before, we start building out the UI more. Okay, awesome. So this is really the key thing. Now I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring to play around with this. And just to give us a little bit of reps and sets, and so you guys can see some good patterns before we wrap for lunch. So I want to make a new component. I'm going to call it a character card. And I'm actually going to get a nice big split screen here. And over here we'll have character, and over here we'll have character card. And I am just going to actually straight up copy our character component for character card. And let's talk about what each one does. And I'll kind of close these just to get rid of stuff. So the character component's job, this is our character page. It fetches information about the character and then it displays it. Now, we've designed our favorites list to hold that character information. If I go here in components in DevTools and I go to my app, and in fact, let's quickly hop to the app over here. For this component state for favorites, which we can see over here, right? And this is pretty high level state because we can pass it down into other stuff. I made the decision in my code that I am going to add the whole character object to the favorites list. So I have that data in here. And that lets me write this card a little differently. So the character page still has to get a character, because if a character is not a favorite, we still need their data. But I can make my character card dumb, and I can pass in the character as a prop. And so, and we'll call it character data because everything else is named character data. So this doesn't have to be state anymore. I don't need useParams to get an ID because I'm going to get it from the character data. It's already going to be gotten. Add to favorites. Favorites still useful for what we need. Let's just get rid of some of these console logs. We'll call this character card. We'll get rid of this ID param. We don't need to make an API call now. I don't need this handle get data. I don't need this use effect. This use effect was just really for explanations. We're going to have the same is favorite method, but that's okay. And now everything else is pretty much the same. So my character card is sort of a dumb component. And this is a pattern you'll often see where you have a dumb component, so to speak, whose only job is to render data that it gets through props, or in this case, through outlet context. And then there's a smart parent component that passes all of the data in. So if I've done this right, when I go to a character page, I should now be able to swap in my dumb character card for all this stuff. I'll leave character there and let's see how this works. And in fact, I don't even need this conditional logic here because the way I'm going to use this component, I'm always going to assume it's got stuff. Though it doesn't hurt to leave it, to be honest. And I think we'll just leave a little message here that just says like div no character data. And then if we run to a problem that way, we know. And so here, let's take all this stuff and get rid of it. And let's use our character card and we'll pass in character data and we'll make it our character data. And we'll close the component and we'll format. And do I need to import it? Let's make sure I've got character card. So I think this might just be a case of VS Code getting a little funny.
The character, the file you're in right now, is inside source, right?
Oh, yeah, so I can just do right components.
And does it need the .jsx at the end?
It shouldn't matter. I'm pretty sure I did something wrong in my character card definition that is escaping me because normally VS Code would give me that nice autocomplete, but it wasn't in this case. So I'm wondering if I did something silly here. Or I may need to restart the dev server. Sometimes with new components, that's an issue. But let's see what the error is here. Does the file exist? Import character card from /components. Character card. So there's something really simple that I'm doing wrong here.
Oh, the import is still wrong. So character is in pages, right?
Oh,
So we need
You
a
have to go up
dot.
one directory.
Yeah, then
yeah.
go.
All right. There we go. And then there is, let's see, another error here, which is interesting. ID is not defined. Oh, because we grab it from use commit params. Let's see, ID is not defined. That looks like it's an error in character card. If we go to the console and we kind of scroll up a bit, character card, line 31. So this is probably just something I missed in my refactor. So let's just do character data. And let's do a refresh and see if we have the same error. But there we go. Now this is working and we have Daenerys. And we can add Daenerys to favorites and we can see all our characters. And now that I've done all this work, I can now go to my favorites page. I can import my character card with the correct path, and VS Code is doing some nice autocomplete for me. And I can go ahead and I can do favorites map. And let's go ahead and map it to sorry, my brain is clearly starting to fade a bit here. To a character card, and we'll pass in character data. And we'll set the key to be. And let's see if that does it. And let me format this. Let's see here. Unexpected token. Did I
Hit the
forget?
close up map.
Yep. So let's close out the map. And there's probably a smaller thumbnail image in the data. I should really poke around. But let's add Ned Stark to our favorites. Let's add Jon Snow to our favorites. And now we've got our favorites. So this is probably a good stopping point because I have ran a bit long here. We didn't get to building remove from favorites, but we could use a very similar logic as we did here. So I'll kind of add that as a to-do. But again, we see that outlet context is an object, and we can put our different functions or properties or values that we want. And the same way we pass state down as props, we can pass state down through the context object. And then for any component that gets rendered as a child of the outlet, because the outlet is the context provider, it's using React's context provider component, we can use that use outlet context hook to grab that context object. And here I just destructure it to grab the favorites. And we can see how cool and powerful this is. And in fact, I probably should, like, we could improve this code, like the character card probably doesn't really need outlet context. I guess it needs it for add to favorites. It'd be kind of nice maybe to pull some of this out. Or we use it. It doesn't make a huge difference. It just depends how dumb we want to design this card to be. Some people like to really only pass stuff in as props, but to be honest, using the context is kind of nice. And now we have a lot of flexibility and options and ways to pass data around our application. And this is cool too, because on the favorites page, we see this is favorite here, right? So if we add whatever we add to the character card, we get on the favorites page, and we get on the character page, and we get everywhere. And in fact, if I wanted all characters, I could show all the characters here as well. That would just be a lot of characters, but that would be pretty cool, right? Because then you can see all of them and scroll through and add to favorites. Though we might want to design like a small version of the character card for that or something. So that is React Outlet Context. And I realize I ran a bit long here. So thank you guys for your patience. Why don't we just see if folks have any questions? But if folks need to hop for lunch, I would say go for it. Let me show the assignment, and then we'll do questions. So the assignment is going to be a continuation of Rick and Morty. Right, continuing to build on your app. For the first part of the assignment, build a character details page, use useParams. Just useNavigate for something. It doesn't matter what it is, just make it up just so you can get some practice on it. And then make a favorite character page, and you're going to want to use useOutletContext to add or remove characters. Use Bootstrap or Tailwind. I would recommend making a character card like you saw me make. And if you have time, add some Cypress tests, which would be awesome. But the focus is on using useOutletContext to implement the favorites. So it should be fun. All right, folks, thank you very much. Have a great lunch, and I can definitely stick around if folks have questions about useOutletContext or the assignments or anything else. Oh, I do apologize. I do have one announcement. We are going to have Rich and Catherine joining us today. I apologize for not making this announcement earlier. They should be joining us for the beginning of some career prep and behavioral interview practice. And that is going to be happening. Let me double check our calendar spreadsheet that we have. That is happening today at 1:30 Central. So that's going to be right after lunch. I do apologize that that wasn't on the Google Calendar. This afternoon, I'll update it with all of them. Now that we're about halfway into the course, every week or couple weeks, Rich and Catherine from Career Services are going to do some behavioral interview practice. And we're going to start having a couple more Beyond Tech talks and other talks focused on this stuff. And resume coaching will kick off soon as well. I realize that, especially with the excitement of Rick and Morty and Outlet Context, the behavioral interview stuff can feel a bit like a sidebar. I just want to say again, it's not. The key to doing well at behavioral interviews is practice and doing it up front. And it's not rocket science, but it does take some time and thought to think about what you want to say and practice it. Because the goal is to have something written down, sort of like set answers to common questions, but to have practiced it so much that it's second nature, so that you're not like sounding like you're reading off a script, right? And so there's some upfront work that has to happen with that. So this stuff today is going to be really valuable in the beginning of a process. I'll add that to the Google Calendar right after we're done. And so then after that will be work time, and I'll get out pairs today as well. All right, folks, thank you very much. That is my saved round announcement. Have a great lunch, and I can stick around a bit if folks do have questions about useOutletContext or the code or anything else. So all that said, what's on people's minds? Like, especially with outlet context, I want to make sure that we're feeling good about this. Are there parts of how to implement this or how this works that still feel a little rocky that might be good to go over, or what are people curious about? Okay.
Yeah, it's just a lot of content that was put out, so I'm still regurgitating everything.
Got it.
Maybe questions later.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, folks. Let me open up the breakout rooms and also stop the recording.